Hi, everyone. Welcome to our May edition here of Kanban for Everyone. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Vacanti, co-founder of prokanban.org and author of all things metrics and flow. Welcome, Dan.
Happy to be here. First time caller, long time listener.
Yeah.
Glad to be on the show.
Exactly. We're here to talk today specifically about this book, Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability, and kind of an exciting point in time for everybody. It's been 10 years. It's a 10-year re-release, right? Since you first wrote this book. Kind of exciting. So I've got questions for you, but our goal today is to also just invite everybody who's listening to ask you questions directly as well. So let's just start with like the most obvious burning question on everyone's mind. Why revisit this book now? Why 10 years later? What prompted that?
I normally blame this on Julia Wester because I was talking to her late last year because maybe we can get into prioritization and why prioritization and all this stuff sucks a little bit later, but because I still haven't put my third book, the third book that I wrote, the second volume to that, I still haven't put that out on Amazon in a print version. And so I was talking to Julia about what I was going to do around that, and then I said, and you know what, there's it's coming up on 10 years on my first book, and I was thinking about revisiting that. And so she said you should absolutely do the 10th anniversary version first. So if Julia says to do something, that's what I do. I mean, that's kind of like you too. I've got all these people who just tell me what to do, and then I just do it. So that's why. 10th anniversary of that book was in March, and I think I got it out before March.
Nice. Does having to take direction from Julia, myself, and your wife mean that you have more than one prioritization queue?
Yeah, and my cat too. So
and
it's like,
cat, right?
get in line. Yeah.
Coco's the boss. We know Coco's the boss.
She is. Yeah,
she's the real boss here. Well, when you first published this book, did you expect that it would have this level of long-term impact?
No, and I guess I'm not even sure that it has. I mean, given where we are with, maybe this is something we could talk about too, given where we were in 2015, or at least I started writing the book actually, I think in 2012, 2013, I think. But given where we were then as an industry and given where we are now, I mean, have we progressed? I don't know. But I mean, I'm certainly very, very thankful, very appreciative of everybody who's read it and who's said nice things about it, and who said it has helped them along their agile journey. I mean, that's really what it's going for. So I mean, if it just helps even a few people, I'm happy. I wish I could say it's had a huge impact, but I guess I'm not so sure.
Well, I had a chance to write the foreword for this one, and if anyone's picked up the new copy, I would say it had a huge impact on me and on my career, and I think it gave me a lot of what I was missing as a Scrum Master, and feeling like I felt like a glorified babysitter for the team, and it really helped me figure out like, how can I do this in a way where it's providing value to the team, where I'm teaching the team how to do stuff with this data and with these metrics. It's actually hopefully making their jobs easier and more impactful on how they're delivering. So, I think it had a huge impact on me, but I could see why you would say that. I think one of the questions I wanted to ask you was what has changed in the industry to make these ideas even more relevant today. But it sounds like maybe what you're saying is not enough has changed in the industry because we're still having the same conversations.
In the intervening time, not only has Jira not updated what they called a control chart, as far as I know. I mean, I think what they call a control chart now is, which by the way is not a control chart, is pretty much what it was 10 years ago. But in the intervening time, they've actually released decimal story points. So, I mean, you tell me, I always say this, some product manager somewhere at Atlassian thought it was much more important to have decimal story points than to actually have a proper cycle time chart. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too depressed this morning to think about this stuff. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to take a step back and kind of be objective about really has our industry changed for the better. So I mean, from that perspective, not much has changed. Maybe things have gotten worse, but I do think, and you probably know this better than anybody, there seems to be much more acceptance for like flow, and well, certainly flow metrics now.
Yeah.
I mean, if we talk about like, safe as a framework, adopted flow metrics as a quote unquote standard, how many years ago. Scrum came out with its Scrum.org came out with this professional Scrum with Kanban. So um, what's nice to know is that there seems to be that a little bit of a progression forward to embracing some of these flow principles and flow topics. Because I think they believe that you can get better predictability from that perspective. So yeah, I mean, a lot of things have not changed for the better, maybe even gotten worse, but I mean, there does seem to be some movement in the right direction, I hope.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the flow metric side of things a little. Over the years, like from when you first did this to this book now, what is the most common way that you've seen teams or organizations misuse or misinterpret flow metrics?
Well, first by ignoring them altogether. So I mean, let's maybe take that off the table. But misuse them, and I talk about this a lot. People love cumulative flow diagrams, especially 10 years ago. They loved cumulative flow diagrams. CFD was like CFD, 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 CFD. And what's I should say it's funny. Maybe I shouldn't be laughing, but most of these people who love CFDs have no clue what a cumulative flow diagram is, or what it's telling you, or how to construct one, or whatever. But they're like, oh, CFD, CFD, CFD. So kind of getting people off of that, and getting them to understand that there's a whole wealth of other stuff that is so much better than saying a cumulative flow diagram. Me for one, I used to beat, I say this all the time, I used to beat teams over the head with whip, right? And be like, going control whip, control whip, control whip. And it turns out that probably taking a look at aging, which is one of the big changes in the book. I put aging kind of front and center in terms of, if you really want to get started with flow metrics, this is where to go. So yeah, so abusing flow metrics, things like looking at CFDs and not really knowing what you're talking about. And then there's some things about quirky definitions of cycle time and lead time.
Yeah.
Those, that kind of stuff drives me nuts. Flow efficiency, putting flow efficiency as the be all end all. Yeah, wait, now you got me going. I don't know. Do you want to talk about any of those or all of those, or you want to skip ahead and?
Well, let's talk flow efficiency. I think we can come back to cycle time, and I think all know the reasons estimations are garbage and story points suck. And I think I would agree with you. We are starting to see a lot of organizations go, this is a waste of time. It's not accurate. It's not giving us the results we want in terms of being more predictable. Let's talk flow efficiency though, because I would agree that I think that's one that there's just a lot of misconception about. So where would you start there? Why isn't flow efficiency one of the flow metrics that we teach?
So bottom, we'll put in place all the reasons why, but for me, bottom line, it's not actionable. There's a reason I call the book Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability. Flow efficiency is not actionable. For everybody out there's probably screaming, flow efficiency is actionable. It's not actionable. I'm sorry, it's not actionable. And the reason I say that is because let's say you are able to calculate your flow efficiency. You're not, by the way, you're not able to calculate it, but let's say that you are. And you say, my flow efficiency is 24.9%. And then the only thing that's really actionable about that is you can say, well, 24.9% is less than 50%, which means that my process is dominated by wait time, which means that I should maybe go attack wait time. As our friend Frank Bagel loves to say, in any context, without knowing anything, going to attack wait time is probably a good thing. You don't have to calculate anything to know that wait time is generally a bad thing. So try to reduce that as much as possible, right? You do not need a flow efficiency calculation for that, So first and foremost, I mean, I guess I'll kind of stop there because I'm guessing you have some follow-up questions. But first and foremost, the reason that flow efficiency is not useful is, I guess, the two reasons I said. Number one, you can't calculate it, and number two, even if you could calculate, it doesn't tell you anything. It just tells you nothing.
So I think a lot of what we talk about from making these metrics actionable and how to put all this into practice often centers on the team level metrics, right? And the team level activities and actions you're trying to get teams to take. When you think about how all of this scales up, things like efficiency tend to be the things that are going to get an executive's attention. So how do you get them to care then? If you're pulling flow efficiency off the table, how do you get the executives to care and have this conversation about the data that you focus on in the book?
Well, yeah, because I mean, at that level, two things. For me, it's more about quantification of risk. I mean, when you say you want to reduce efficiency. Why? I mean, or sorry, you want to increase efficiency. You want to maybe increase efficiency. Why? What's the business driver? What's the business motivation? What's the economic impact that you hope to achieve? And I think there's a much better way to quantify some of that risk around the problems that executives are trying to solve. A lot of which is talked about, in that book. So number one, it's not necessarily about. I mean, at some point it will be about efficiency. Maybe not the efficiency you think it is. For me, it's more about that quantification of risk, and it's risk like, hey, we're delivering wrong things to our customers. Well, let's get faster feedback then. Faster feedback, reduce cycle time, right? We're not delivering enough stuff to our customers. Well, that's increasing throughput. I mean, so there's all kinds of stuff. Oh, we're not meeting our deadlines. It's like, well, that's because you really don't understand your chances of meeting those deadlines. What's really going on. Into all that. So I think a lot of people like to try and frame that as an efficiency problem. Our developers aren't working hard enough, or whatever. But there's probably other stuff that's going on that I think these flow metrics can make visible much better than flow efficiency can.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and in it, you talk not just in the book, but in general, a lot about risk over certainty, like you just said, and it's an important distinction to make when we think about so many of the things that we do that I think give us a false sense of certainty or a false presentation of certainty with what we're trying to do from a delivery perspective. How can teams start to use these things to make better bets, to reduce the risk in what they're doing?
Well, yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's it right there, right? Isn't it? I mean, it's like, first of all, in order to make better decisions, we really have to have that understanding of what is the risk that we are encountering. We had a good conversation about this, in a meeting previous to this. It's like, before I even know what action I can take, I need to know, number one, what risk am I facing, and number two, what is my risk tolerance? And if those two things are out of balance, then we can decide on, okay, what's the course of action in terms of how do I go about either risk reduction or risk mitigation or something else. But until you actually can start putting some approximate numbers around some of those things, I don't even know how you have the conversation. I mean, I guess you can kind of wave your hand and say, hey, maybe another global pandemic is going to hit, or maybe whatever. Janae had a good quote about elephants earlier, Janae, that I'm not going to repeat here. But maybe some of these things are going to happen. Well, maybe, but what's potentially a better indicator, potentially, is that generally speaking, the things that we've seen in the past, given enough data and given the right data, the things that we've seen in the past are likely to be the things that we've seen in the future. These other things, I mean, while possible, are less likely. So really, when we talk about risk, let's talk about the things, at least, as a large part of our conversation, let's talk about the things we've seen in the past and kind of use that as a model for what we expect the future to be. And when that changes, when we get new data about, hey, maybe that the future is not necessarily looking like our past, well, let's gather that data and then let's re-quantify. So I babbled a lot there. I'm not sure I answered the question, but
you did. But you said something really interesting there about risk tolerance. And my question there would be, like, when you go into an organization to work with them, or you're talking to leaders, do you feel like they can answer that question?
Not right away. No, not right away. And this is this is another thing I would say. If I had a good way of explaining to leaders and maybe getting from them, what their number one, an understanding of risk, and number two, telling me what their risk tolerance is. If I had a way to do that, and again, Janae's not invited. We'd be sitting on a beach somewhere, right? Sipping drinks and things like that. But it's funny when you ask executives other questions, executives of publicly traded companies. If you can say, hey, what do you think your stock price is going to be in the next quarter or in the next 6 months? They generally can frame that to you in terms of risk, forward guidance, and if you read any company reports, any publicly traded company reports, they always talk about forward guidance, and that's what they're really talking about is risk. Anybody who, at least in the United States anyway, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, If you do retirement planning, right, that's risk quantification. How much insurance you cover, you carry, that's risk quantification. So we do it. These are things that we do every single day of our lives. But yet, for some reason, when you get to companies, especially companies that do software development, even insurance companies that do software development, they want to put blinders on, and they're like, oh, risk. What do you mean risk? I need to know with 100% certainty what's going to happen and what you're going to do. So it is tough, but generally speaking, if you can frame it in terms of that 4-letter R word, I think you start to gain a little bit more traction, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to make you this much more efficient or this much more whatever. I think it's a much better conversation to say, hey, you're managing a portfolio right now. That portfolio is full of risk. You probably don't know what that risk is. Let's start talking about, does the risk that you're carrying in your portfolio match the risk that you think you need as a company?
Yeah, I would think that would get a lot of people's attention, and probably more than efficiency. I think, we've talked to, I think efficiency, especially in the current climate, can feel like we're going to come in and say, oh, we're going to recommend that you reduce headcount, right? Or that you lay off all these teams. And AI has a lot of people thinking in the same kind of lane there, that's what we mean by efficiency. So I really like that shift to risk over efficiency. You talked a little bit there too about forecasting and using that past data to try to model out what will happen in the future. A big part of the book centers all around probabilistic forecasting. What's your favorite aha moment that you've witnessed when someone first sees kind of what a probabilistic forecast can do?
So the one that came to mind is it's not directly probabilistic forecast. And I'm going to call him out, but he's just going to have to deal with this. It's not so much around probabilistic forecasting. It's more about how to create a predictable process so that you can do probabilistic forecasting. And Pratik's going to hate me for telling this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. It's the first training that I was where I met Pratik. Well, I think we'd met before, but that he was in. I was doing flow training, and he was actually a participant. He was an attendee in that class, and we were playing the Get Kanban game. I read the old Get Kanban board game, and they had completely screwed up their process early on in the game. They had completely screwed everything up. They had just absolutely screwed everything up, and about halfway through, they realized, I don't know if anyone's ever played the Get Kanban game, about halfway through, they realized that they had way too much work in progress. And so the thing that they did on their input queue, they lowered their input queue work in progress column to 0. Now, I'd never seen anybody do that before, but they realized that, hey, we screwed up stuff so much. We've got too much work in progress. The absolute worst thing that we can do is start bringing more stuff in. And so for me, that when a team does something like that, I mean, obviously that's extreme, and obviously, I'm not saying that every team should do this, although maybe. It's when somebody has that kind of understanding that it's like, okay, now people really understand the impacts of some of these decisions that they're making in terms of their ability to be predictable long term. I don't know. Is that close? Does that help?
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, I think that is kind of the downside, or I guess the thing I miss about having the physical game, although I don't miss having to walk people through trying to correct the charts that they screwed up making by hand. But getting to watch those kind of experiences when people are like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I think I've seen the inverse too, where I've watched teams play that game and remove all the whip limits. They're like, I know what the trick is going to be. Let's take all the whip limits off the board and see what happens. And you're like, okay, let's see.
This is why we brought popcorn, right? Yeah.
Put it to 30, right? Yeah. Let's go back to the book. Let's talk about if someone's picking this book up for the very first time, where should they start?
With your forward?
Start of the process?
Yeah, I don't know. With a beer? I don't. Where should they start in terms of how to how to approach it? I mean, like what?
Yeah, how to approach it, and I think how to look at ways to put it into practice, right? I think there's so many books you can read out there on flow, on agile, on all this theory of what to do with these practices. And I, like you said, your goal with the book is to make it actionable and things people can put into practice right away. So maybe less about where to start physically in the book and where to start once you've
yeah, okay, yeah. Like, yeah. So I guess physically in the book, I mean, if you really want to spoil the punchline, you can jump right to the last chapters. I mean, to your point. And by the way, full disclosure, Colleen was one of the reviewers of the book, so she knows exactly all of this stuff. The last 2 chapters are the more actionable side of things. It's like, what data to collect, how to get started, and how to start using these things on a day-to-day basis. So if that's the type of information you're looking for, go to those last chapters. But for me, the fundamental thing, you want to get started with flow metrics, the fundamental thing is to pay attention to aging. Now that's an easy thing to say. It's a much harder thing to do, because just even to pay attention to aging, you have to have your workflow mapped out. You have to have well-defined start and end points. You have to decide what your work item types are that are going to be moving through your process. So there's some homework that you have to do, and there's some semi-heavy lifting that you have to do to even do that. But once you've got that in place, for me, it's just all about paying attention to aging. It's incorporating that. We spend a lot time in our APK class. We spend a lot of time in our AMP class talking about how do you incorporate something like aging into your daily meeting.
Well, and I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it for our audience. Building off of the aging piece here, if you've read the first version, what can you expect to see that's different, or new concepts, or anything that you completely rewrote or rethought when you approached the 10th anniversary edition?
Yeah, the first third has been completely rewritten. In fact, I would say the first third of the book is pretty much new material, sans the stuff I stole from the Kanban Pocket Guide. I hope you forgive me for that one. But so the first third is completely new because of that kind of shift in perspective that we talked about before. 10 years ago, it was all about cumulative flow diagrams. I personally have found cumulative flow diagrams to be way too noisy in terms of teaching this stuff and having people learn about it. The best way from an actionable perspective is just to pay attention to aging. And so that's the shift in perspective from the book. Whereas before, I started off with little long cumulative flow diagrams. Now I start off completely with aging. By the way, most of the cumulative flow diagram stuff is still there. It's just moved. It's just been moved to a different part of the book to be a little bit more subservient to the aging conversation. The little saw stuff is still there. Again, it's just been moved and presented more as a justification as to why you look at aging. So yeah, that's kind of the big difference. That heavy emphasis on aging up front, a little bit more solid information on how to get started at the end, and then kind of in between is just kind of reworked, refactored existing material to make those bookends look a little bit better.
Was there anything you took out or completely removed, or you were like, I hate this part, this was a terrible idea, this was terrible advice, I'm yanking it for this edition?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, we're stretching my memory here. There were a couple chapters in the first book that I didn't realize it, but I had started writing my second book with these 2 chapters. So I think I had a really, really crappy chapter on Monte Carlo simulation that just kind of makes me cringe when I go back and think about that. So there's a crappy chapter on Monte Carlo simulation. There was a crappy chapter on things like histograms, I think, although that might still be in the appendix. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of material that is like, hey, this stuff is just better handled in the second book. So I yanked that stuff completely. The stuff that was still semi-relevant, but maybe not part of the new narrative, I still kept in there, and a lot of stuff got kind of moved to the appendices, just to be a little bit more reader friendly. You can skip to those to optionally read those if you want to, although I think most people skip appendices or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of material that was in my and maybe, I guess, now that I mentioned, now even the third book, some stuff on variability that I kind of had to rework because it's better handled in the third book. Yeah.
What is the third book for those who may not be aware of the others in the series?
Yeah, so first book is Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability. The second book is When Will It Be Done? And the third book is Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability, Volume 2. This time it's personal.
Yeah. You can get a box set edition now.
Should do that.
Free. Yeah. Okay, well, I want to invite all of our viewers to start asking you questions too, and you can feel free to start putting those in the chat, and we'll start going through those in a moment. Before we jump to that, how have you seen any of these ideas spread beyond software? Are you seeing adoption in other industries or other places where this is starting to bleed over into those other spots other than just software development?
Well, I mean, this is something I don't think we talk about enough in our industry. I think a lot of these concepts are already probably pretty well known in a lot of industries outside of software. I think in many ways we're late to the game, and we're playing catch up. I mean, the application might be a little bit different because of our context, because of a knowledge work context, but I mean, the poster child is like manufacturing. I think manufacturing understands this very, 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 very well. But I think we mentioned like the finance industry and the insurance industry, banking industry. The people like that have understood using tools like Monte Carlo simulation to quantify risk for a long, long time. Like oil companies, although we don't really like to talk about them too much. But I mean, yeah. I mean, I think I think it's more about, software. In my not so humble opinion, the software industry has had so much of a not invented here, vibe, that it's annoying because most of the problems that we're up against have been solved, and not only have they been solved, but they've been solved like decades, if not centuries ago. If we would only look outside of our blinders to kind of adopt some of those solutions. So, yeah. I think it's more we're playing catch up.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. We like to think we're first.
Yeah, we're not.
It's all fresh ideas.
We are not. Yeah.
Well, and it's probably going to change even more now that we're starting. As AI speeds everything up or adds more volume to all the stuff that we're working on, we're going to be faced with the same challenges that you've talked about, right? Of it's adding more noise, it's adding more unfinished. We can start stuff easier, but is it going to help us get things over the finish line any faster? And I think software is going to maybe be a little late to that game too, when we think about how that will impact it. Well, I see a bunch of good questions in here. Let's start with Sath. Welcome, Sath. Dan, you say risk tolerance, but what about risk appetite? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Sath, that's yeah. So I mean, I don't know. There's Sath. Do you think? And you can follow up. Are you saying that maybe those are two sides of the same coin? Do you think they're different? I mean, I mean, if the way that I interpret your question is, it's more as like, are there situations where executives may want to go seek out more risk because they think that like I said, will lead to a better economic outcome. So if we're talking about appetite in terms of seeking out risk and tolerance more as risk avoidance. I think they're kind of the same thing, right? I mean, I'm trying in my mind to come up with a distinction. The question I'm asking myself is, would I have a fundamentally different answer if somebody was talking to me about risk tolerance versus risk appetite? I'm not sure I would. I don't know, Colleen, do you have any thoughts, Seth? I mean, Seth, I'd love to hear from you too, what you think, but I think it's all about some quantification of risk at some point, right? I know, Colleen, help me out here.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I think it's the quantification, and it's really just even posing the question, like we were saying earlier. I think a lot of organizations can't answer what their tolerance or appetite is because they haven't thought about it from that perspective. And usually it's more reactive. Usually we can answer this when something really shitty has happened. Then I can tell you that was too much risk. Yeah. But before that, we're not usually having that conversation to say, what is our tolerance and what is our appetite? And I think like a lot of things, thinking about the metrics that are going to be clear indications of whether or not you're on track for that, you need to know up front what is that number, even if it's a ballpark, right? So that you can say, oh, we're getting close to that. We're approaching a level that is making me uncomfortable or making me uneasy as a leader of an organization. Without that, it's always going to be, we're never going to know until it's too late. And I think that's probably true for both sides of that coin, with tolerance and with the appetite.
Yeah, I mean, to use an example I was using before, we talk about retirement planning in the U.S. I mean, yeah, I mean, Saf, to your point, I mean, I think when you're younger and you're just starting out, I think you have a risk appetite, right? It's like I'm generally willing to seek out maybe riskier assets because I've got enough time, hopefully enough time to recover should something go bad. But when you get a certain age, like me, not Colleen, because you're still 28 or something like that.
28 forever.
Yeah. But when you get to a certain age, it's like now, your risk appetite starts going down, because it's like, God forbid there's another financial panic in the next 10, 20 years, whatever it is there going to be time for me to recover from that? So I think, Seth, that's a great question. I mean, it's all about kind of understanding context, and are we seeking out risk, or are we trying to avoid it? But as Colleen just said, I mean, you kind of have to know that. You kind of have to, before you can even start taking any action, you kind of have to start quantifying that and thinking about it.
Awesome. Great question. Let's see. Steve Tendon. Oh, he's got a comment on the zero reduced input queue. Reminds him of theory of constraints, bootstrapping, practice of freezing. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Shocking that Steve Tendon is going to talk about theory of constraints. So for my full disclosure, I'm not a theory of constraints expert. I'm not, so I don't know what a bootstrapping practice of freezing is. I don't know what that. So if it's the same, great. And they both work, great. I don't know if I have much to say about that. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Let's go to some easier questions from Steve. I see some here in the comments around how long, on the authorship side of things. He said, how long did it take you to write the book? How was your writing routine? And what were some sources of inspiration? Did you suffer from writer's block? He's got a whole bunch here. So just unpack your process a little bit for us on how you wrote and how you attacked writing this book.
I don't know if I like to admit this. I have admitted this a couple times in public, and those of you who have listened to me before have probably heard this, but I really don't like to admit it, because my process is pretty much, talking about thresholds. When I get angry, that's when I write. Like I'll see something on LinkedIn, I'll have a conversation with somebody, and I get really, really angry, and I'll just write. And so when I do that, I don't really have a process. It's just like, just like whatever comes out, comes out. The first book, I can say the first book, because I was getting so angry so often because of cumulative flow diagrams, what I ended up doing is just blocking off a month of my time, and I was able to write from start to finish. I was able to write that book in less than a month, basically, essentially writing a chapter a day. And then for this one, it was more editing than necessarily new stuff. So this new one is like whenever I had a chance, whenever Colleen let me out of the house to play, I got to I'd just sit down and I would kind of tweak, and then I would beg for Colleen's time and say, please review this, please review this, please review this. So I hate to break it to you, no process. It's like just whenever I get angry enough, I sit down and write, and then what comes out is what you read, essentially.
From a content perspective, Steve was also asking, what chapter was the most challenging to write and why, and what chapter are you most proud of?
I can answer that for my third book. I can answer that one. For this one, the one I'm probably most proud of is the Little's Law, the chapter on Little's Law. And I would say that's probably also the hardest one to write, because getting people to understand why Little's Law is important is hard, because there's not much out on there. I'll tell people this. I had a brief email exchange with Dr. Little back in 2010, but it was nothing about his law. It was more about trying to get time on his calendar. And so, because I wasn't able to talk to him directly, I had to rely on just rely on what he published, and there's just a dearth of information just directly from him, starting in 1961, all the way up until to 2010 when I tried to speak to him. There's just not much him talking specifically about the law and specifically about how to apply it to flow practices. So yeah, I would say that's probably the toughest and the most rewarding, if it can be the same thing. If anybody's interested in the third book, it's the one I'm most proud of is I think it's chapter 9, voice of the customer versus voice of the process. If you want to read that third book, that's for me, that's the money chapter.
And there is a question here on which chapter do you think would make the most impact on the reader? Is that what you would say for this one too? Go read the third?
Probably, yeah.
The most impactful chapter is the third book.
I think I'm hoping the most impactful chapter in this one is the first chapter. I'm hoping, where I start to explain aging and why it's important. So I'm hoping the most, other than Colleen's forward, of course, I'm hoping the most, because I'm hoping that the first one hooks you enough that you keep reading.
Why do you think aging is such a, not like, it seems so obvious. It seems like such a simple concept when we talk about it. When you read the first chapter, you're going to be like, yes, this is easy. This is easy to implement. I don't even need fancy tooling for these things, right? We can start this conversation without it. What's the gap there in putting it into practice? Why is that such a hard thing for us?
Well, because I think most agile frameworks don't care about it, right? I mean, you look at Scrum, because everybody knows I love to pick on Scrum. You look at Scrum. Scrum does a great job of telling you how to set up a sprint. It does a great job of telling you how to tear down a sprint. But pretty much what happens in between those two things, it tells you nothing. It's just like, developers just go figure it out. And so this is aging. To your point, aging is not something that a developer would go seek out. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't understand. It's like, hey, all this stuff has to get done anyway. So who cares the order that I work on it? Who cares if it all just gets done on the last day of the sprint? Who cares? Right? I mean, it's like, and not only that, but the Scrum Guide specifically gives me the power, quote unquote, power to do whatever I want, right? Once the sprint has started. So, I mean, it's just not something that I think the developers would seek out. And it's not something I don't think, I mean, intuitive, like they say, I think product owners, intuitively understand this. I mean, executives, I intuitively understand it. Accountants for sure understand it, because they have this concept of aging receivables, and they know, the longer that a receivables out there, the bigger the risk that I'm never going to collect on this debt, right? So, I mean, I think, a lot of people intuitively understand it, but it's just, I don't think it's anything that you would specifically seek out, which I think what makes it so powerful. It's just something you would never think of on your own.
I see a comment here from Tristan. He said, your book changed my career, Dan. 6 years ago when we started using Nave, I read your book to write articles about understanding the charts. Fast forward, and your book is permanently cemented on my desk, constantly talking about measuring flow. Let's talk about the charts side of things, because I think, like Tristan says, there are a lot of tools out there. A lot of companies get their hands on these tools and then don't know what the hell the charts are saying. Where do you recommend people start, other than your book, in really making sense of that data once they have access to it?
Yeah. Well, so first and foremost, thank you very much for those kind comments, Tristan. I really appreciate it. So, like I said, it's as an author, those are the kinds of things you want to hear for sure. So thank you for that. Where to get started is not really where you might think. And this is a conversation I was having with Julia, a couple of weeks ago. I'm talking about Julia Wester, who's CEO of 55 Degrees, who operates the Actionable Agile Analytics tool right now. And if you go look at the types of support requests that 55 Degrees gets, it's almost never to do with understanding charts or anything like that. It's almost always, I should say almost always, a lot of it, a non-trivial percent of it is people don't have their process set up properly. They don't have their workflow mapped properly, especially if they're using a tool like Jira, right? They just don't. They're trying to maybe use Jira out of the box, projects or, whatever. And they have no concept of started and finish points and status mapping to columns and, and things like that. They just have absolutely no concept of it. And so if all of that is screwed up, your chances of having a decent scatter plot or even aging chart or anything like that, essentially zero, And so I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing, which is why we spend so much time at Pro Kanban trying to get people to understand the importance of some of these first steps. Yeah, I know you want the metrics. Yeah, I know you want the predictability, but you got to do this basic blocking and tackling first. Everybody wants to win an NBA championship. We're talking about NBA championships. Everybody wants to win an NBA championship, but you got to practice your free throws.
Too soon. It's too soon in Denver for that.
Sorry. but you got to practice free throws. I mean, I mean, for me, that's the most important thing is people don't understand. As Frank Vega says, your process shapes your data, and your data shapes your policies. You got to start with an understanding of that process bit, or you'll never even have a shot at the data bit.
Yeah. And then I think for so many organizations, like you said, you're hamstrung by the tools that are selected.
Yeah.
Jira is obviously one that we talk about the most. And sometimes it's not even an unwillingness to find the right process or design the right process, but it becomes really complicated to implement it in large organizations where you don't even have control over making modifications to those workflows. When you think about like those constraints on a system, what are things that people can put into practice right away if they don't have the ability to maybe tackle the big things that we would want them to start with?
Well, back in the day, I don't know if this is an option anymore, but back can I say back in the day? Colleen always makes fun of me when I say back in the day.
When you had to walk to the office uphill both ways.
Uphill in the snow, yeah. I don't know if everybody remembers those things called whiteboards, right? And you could have a physical board, and I've still got. I mean, if you gave me 30 seconds, I could find lots of pictures of physical boards where a process had already been defined for them in a tool like version 1 or what was it before Azure DevOps? What was the Microsoft tool? I'm drawing a blank now. But anyway, the process had been locked down, and you had to use, if you're managing work within that tool, you had to use their canned workflow. But if you had a whiteboard, you could map whatever workflow you wanted out on the whiteboard, and then easily map what's going on the whiteboard to the to the tool. So independent of that, I don't know what options. Yeah, I mean, you have to be. I guess you just have to get creative. At that point, maybe.
Yeah, and I do think there's so many options available these days too to do that virtually in the case that you can't do it in
like Miro or something.
Yeah, Miro, Lucid, right? There's all these ways to create that visibility without having it be physical. I think the physical boards are great, but I think the other part of that is there's so much. It sounds so simple. But even just getting that board visible and having that conversation as part of your daily changes everything. And I'm always like, it always seems like very obvious once you have it there. But I can't tell you how many teams I've gone to work with, and I'm like, why are you guys doing stand up without a board in front of you? Like, I don't care what you did yesterday. Where is that on the board? Like, I don't really want to have that conversation. And I know we say, don't worry about the 3 questions, but maybe the best advice is make sure you're doing stand up around that board. Otherwise, who cares what you're talking about? Because then we can talk about the Nuggets loss, right? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So by the way, Tristan, thank you. It was TFS, and I remember it's like out of the box for TFS was proposed, active, resolved, closed, or something. There were 4 states, and you weren't allowed to change them. I'm talking very, very early. But if you go look at the pictures of the really, really early Kanban boards, we had a much more complicated workflow that would map to those states. So yeah. So if you really want to, you can get around this stuff, for sure.
Yeah. I see a really important question here from Steve. How many whiskeys did it take to write this book?
It depended on if I was doing any writing before or after I did a drunk agile with Pratik. So
I know. And are we going back over 10 years? 10 years of whiskey? Because it's gonna be a lot harder to quantify.
That's why my picture's kind of chopped off here, but I always have a whiskey within arm's reach. That's kind of one of my rules when I write. I always have a whiskey within. You understand why Fitzgerald died an alcoholic. If you're a writer, you kind of really start to understand some of these things. But yeah,
as long as you don't blame it on working with me.
Yeah. But to be fair, honestly, I didn't drink as much as you might think. I really didn't.
Well, Dan, let's fast forward. So it's been 10 years. 10 years from today, what do you hope people will say about this book in 10 more years?
I hope they're still reading it. I'm still getting comments like what Tristan has said. I hope that there is another layer that we've peeled back, that we've learned, kind of along the lines of aging. For me, aging was kind of the big epiphany over the past 10 years. I'm hoping there's something like that that's coming up too in the next 10 years. That'll give us all something to write about. I don't know what that is. Right now it's easy to say it'll probably be something around the AI. Probably have an AI flavor to it, but I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know.
Well, and kudos to you, Dan. I mean, I think it's that attitude is something that's really missing from the agile industry in general of really being stuck with one version of everything that's never going to change and trying to shove that into places where it doesn't make sense and we're not open to adapting, even though that's the whole point of what we're supposed to be doing. So I think you've really set a great example of being able to say, here's what I did 10 years ago. Here's what's still valid. Here's what's not. And here's what I've learned along the way. I wish we saw more of that in this industry. So I'm grateful to you for that and setting that example.
Thanks for saying. Thank you.
All right, we've got a question from Kevin. He said, hi, you briefly mentioned scrum.org Scrum with Kanban course. Are there any updates in the new edition regarding actionable metrics in a Scrum context?
No. So short answer is no to not really. The longer answer is if you're really looking for that, on the Pro Kanban website, there's a Flow Metrics for Scrum Teams pocket guide. I think do we call it a pocket guide or just Flow Metrics for Scrum Teams?
Yeah.
There's a PDF you can download that I wrote with Will Seeley a few years ago. So if you're really looking about flow metrics applied in the Scrum context, that's where I would point you. And that one's free. So have at it. Go grab it. So I hopefully you find that helpful to you. Where I think maybe reading my book will help when you read that paper, that PDF, is maybe give you some better understanding as to why we're recommending some of the things that we are, the kinds of justifications as to why we say some of the things that we do about how to use flow in a Scrum context. But in terms of that actionable, hands-on, how do you do this in Scrum, I would just hands down recommend that paper over my book.
Awesome. I see one from Akosh talking about the future. What is the next work item age? What's the hype?
There we go. Janae, who had 1247 for me to talk about this. My big thing, so outside of AI, of course, outside of the impact of AI, but this has been on my wish list for as long as I can remember, because I'm old now. I mean, so easily 15 years, probably going back 20 years, is the one fundamental question that I do not believe that we have answered in our industry is there really an economic impact to the company for doing Agile? Can we prove that you get better economic outcomes by adopting Agile practices, either to your top line or to your bottom line? Let's assume for a second that you are a for-profit company, and let's assume that you want to be a going concern, that you want to stay in business. With those two assumptions, we have never, as an industry, proven that you get better economic outcomes by adopting Agile. I think we've come close in a couple ways, but I don't think there is that definitive proof, and maybe there can't be, maybe there will never be. But if we can start putting dollars and cents to some of the practices, like for example, I say pay attention to aging, and I know that paying attention to aging will help with your predictability. But does predictability help with your top line? Does predictability help with your bottom line? I believe it does. I mean, my hypothesis is that it does, and I believe it has probably pretty significant impact. But I've never been able to prove it. So, I mean, that for me, that would be the next thing that I would love to. I'd love to solve. I don't know, Colleen, what do you think? I know you get sick of me hearing me talking about this, but that's kind of my hot button issue.
Yeah, no, I think it's a hot button issue, and I think it's the reason the industry is struggling. The Agile industry is struggling so much right now is because I think companies have invested way too much money in this for far too long and not been able to show a better economic outcome. And I think they're asking for that now. And maybe it's too late. I think I've worked in organizations where we've used SAFe, and I think that's a great example where if you look at maybe, even if it's a big, old, slow moving industry where maybe you were only doing releases once or twice a year in the past, and you moved to being able to do releases every quarter as a result of putting those practices into place, what was the cost, right? What's the cost? What's the overhead of doing that? and how long did it take you to get to the point where you were potentially releasing more frequently? Then you can also dig into, is it the right stuff? Are we deploying the right things? Are we getting more value out the door? Or is it just more story points?
Well, yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, and I think not to keep plugging other stuff, but Pratik and I did a drunk agile on this recently, talking about kind of the science of agile, lack of science in agile, and it's like there's a big difference between what sounds good and what is good, and a lot of so-called agile practices. I think you and I both are going to talk about this. Shameless plug in Budapest next week. There's a lot of stuff out there that sounds good, but when you kind of look at it, a little bit more critically, some of these things are probably doing more harm than good. And I totally agree with you. It's like I think that's why a lot of these frameworks are dying a horrible death. And with respect, they probably should. I mean, I'm not saying the people who practice these things are bad. I'm not saying that they had bad intentions or whatever. But I mean, most of that guidance, is probably more harmful than helpful. But how do we quantify, again, it comes back to how do we quantify that input from impact from an economic perspective?
Yeah. And how do we start now? I mean, I think that's the other big piece, right? We always say this with flow metrics, like one of the best parts of flow metrics is that this is data you already have. You don't have to re-baseline, and you don't have to wait 6 months to get new data on your process. But I think the same is going to be true when we start to think about how to measure the economic outcomes of agile practices or Kanban practices. We also have to be able to get a good starting point for those measures based on how much work we've already done.
Yeah. And it's one thing we haven't talked about is for me, the big benefit of the flow metrics is from the perspective of the customer. It's like we're answering the questions that the customer cares about. Customer doesn't care about story points. Guarantee your customer. And we talk about all the time. I mean, every product owner that I've ever worked with, when they've been handed a story point estimate in their head or maybe on a piece of paper, they're doing some calculation to try to translate story points into time. It's like,
or money, even. I've seen
money, yes.
Too, of what's our cost per story point.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much when I walked out the door.
Yeah. So regardless of whether story points are a good thing or a bad thing, one thing I can say, it's not the language of the customer. So can we please start tracking these metrics in terms of what our customers are experiencing?
Yeah. We can spend an hour on that particular topic. That one's going to require whiskey, though, to Steve's original question.
For sure.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for spending this morning with me, afternoon for some of you folks in other locations, or evening. Shameless plugs here, but where can people go to learn more about you, what's in the book, and connect with community members that are actually doing this in real life?
So I mean, the be all end all for all things flow, of course, is prokanban.org. The organization that is hosting this this meetup. I mean, if you're looking for it's another thing we don't talk about enough in our industry. If you're looking for a safe, inclusive, diverse way to learn about this stuff, where community that welcomes you rather than admonishing you for not believing in some certain cultish fashion, then ProKanban is your place. So you come to prokanban.org, come to our Slack community, come participate with us and things like this. This is where please do. The book itself is on several different channels, LeanPub and Amazon being the two biggest ones. My heartfelt request is, if you are interested in this book, please purchase from LeanPub and not Amazon. Jeff Bezos has enough money, and I don't think we need him to give him any more. But if you're locked into that ecosystem and you have no choice, then I understand why you want to do Amazon. But if you don't mind, LeanPub is much better because, again, I think LeanPub kind of shares some of the principles that we're trying to do at prokanban.org, and I would just like to see those types of organizations succeed rather than the incumbent evil ones. Did I say evil? Am I allowed to say evil?
You did say evil. I was going to follow that up by asking if you could take a 5-minute flight on a Blue Origin spaceship, who are the 4 other people? I'll put astronauts in air quotes here. Who would you bring with you?
Does it have to be Blue Origin? Could it be somebody who's not Jeff Bezos?
I don't know. Are they doing 5-minute tours in space yet? That's the only one I know of.
It would be you, Colleen. You'd be at the top of the list. I don't know.
Because I'd pack gin.
Yeah. I'm sorry, miss, you can't carry that on. I don't know. I have to think about that. Living or dead, or just
Ooh, good. Yeah, I'm open to dead. Yeah, I mean,
you're open to dead?
we're going to space.
Yeah, on a Jeff Bezos ship, which is more likely. Yeah, no, I'd have to think about that.
I'm
Can I
guessing
get back to you?
Katy Perry is not in the top five here.
No, but what was it? Left Shark or Right Shark? Might be. Was it Left Shark? Was it?
I'm not sure which. Yeah, I think left shark. Well,
Yeah.
thank you everybody for joining us today. Tristan, yes, he did say Lean Pub. That is the preferred place to purchase if you don't already have a copy. Check out the new edition, and also check out the other books Dan mentioned. The newest book release, I think, is another great read. Grab the new copy and grab Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability 2. My favorite thing is to be kind of the book ninja here and drop these on desks for folks, or if you know people are flying, get them a copy before they hop on the plane. My original copy is still full of Post-its and dog-eared pages, and like Tristan was, or I think somebody else was saying, it's still stuck to their desk. It's such a great handbook for everything that we do, and I find myself still referencing so many of the things from the original copy. So grab yours. And Dan, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the great questions, Colleen, and thanks to all of you for all the great questions. Hope to see you in 10 years. Thanks, everyone.